There is a proposal being debated right now that could permanently cut your Social Security check. The people most at risk are not the ones who did anything wrong. They are the ones who planned carefully, contributed every year, and assumed the rules they built their retirement around would still be the rules when they got there. The cap is set at $50,000. Once you cross it under the wrong conditions, you cannot go back. And most people will not find out until the damage is already done. You have been told your entire working life that Social Security is not welfare. It is not a benefit that can be means tested away. It is an insurance program. You paid into it. The money came out of your paycheck, every paycheck for decades. When you retire, you get back a benefit proportional to what you put in. That is the deal. That is the promise. And most people planning for retirement have built their entire income projection around it. The average retired worker in 2024 collected about $1,907 per month from Social Security. But higher earners, people who spent 30 or 40 years at above average incomes and contributed the maximum payroll tax every single year, can receive significantly more. Some of them are looking at monthly checks in the range of $3,500 to $4,800. Over a 25 to 30-year retirement, that is not a rounding error. That is the difference between a retirement you planned for and one you survive on. The false belief is not that Social Security exists. The false belief is that it will work the way it was designed when you get there. Because right now there is a serious proposal on the table that would change the fundamental nature of that promise. Whether it passes in its current form or a modified version of it, the underlying question it raises will not go away. The system is under pressure, and the people who get hurt in every restructuring are the ones who never updated their assumptions. Social Security faces a funding shortfall. This is not a political opinion. It is actuarial math. The Social Security trustees have projected for years that the combined trust fund reserves will be depleted sometime in the early 2030s, likely around 2033 or 2034. At that point, without legislative action, benefits would automatically be cut to match incoming payroll tax revenue. The trustees' most recent reports estimated that cut at roughly 23 to 25% across the board. That is the pressure behind the proposal you need to understand. The idea being discussed is to cap Social Security benefits at $50,000 per year for individual recipients and $100,000 per year for married couples. Proponents argue it would address approximately 20% of the projected funding gap. It would preserve full benefits for lower and middle earners while reducing payments only for the highest benefit recipients. On the surface, that sounds targeted. Reasonable, even. But the mechanics matter more than the summary. If you are a higher earner who has spent your career contributing at or near the maximum payroll tax, which in 2024 is assessed on wages up to $168,600, your expected benefit is built on a formula tied to your earnings history. The current maximum monthly benefit for someone retiring at full retirement age in 2024 is $3,822. That is about $45,864 per year, which lands just under the proposed cap. But for those retiring slightly earlier, those with a different benefit calculation, or those whose total household income crosses $100,000 combined, the cap bites in ways that are not immediately obvious from the headline number. And there is a piece of this that does not make most news coverage. The proposal as written does not include automatic inflation adjustments. A $50,000 cap that is not indexed to inflation is not a fixed ceiling. It is a slowly descending ceiling. Each year that inflation moves household costs upward without adjusting the cap, more retirees fall under it. People who today would be well clear of the threshold could find themselves directly affected 15 or 20 years from now, long after they made irreversible decisions about when to claim, how much to save in other accounts, and what retirement income they could count on. There is a reason you have not been running scenarios on what happens if Social Security gets restructured before you retire. It is not because you are not smart, it is because of how your brain handles threats that are distant, abstract, and uncertain. Psychologists call it the availability heuristic. It is the mental shortcut where we assess the probability of something based on how easily we can picture it happening. You can picture a car accident. You have seen them. You have heard about them. Your brain has a concrete image for that risk, so it feels real enough to take precautions. But you cannot vividly picture a Social Security rule change that affects your benefit in 2031. There is no concrete image for it. The threat exists as an abstract statistic, not a felt reality. So the brain files it under things that might matter later and returns to what is in front of you right now. Behavioral economists call this present bias. It is the documented tendency to systematically overvalue the present moment relative to the future, even when the future consequences are larger. A 2021 Vanguard analysis found that when savers were shown detailed projections of how benefit reductions would affect their monthly income in retirement, they reported far higher anxiety and urgency than when they were shown the same information in percentage terms. The math was identical. The felt stakes were completely different. We are not wired to feel compounding future losses the way we feel an immediate one. And there is a third layer. Research from Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky on loss aversion shows that the pain of losing something we believe we already own, something we have already earned, is roughly twice as intense as the pleasure of gaining the same thing. Your Social Security benefit does not feel like a future possibility. It feels like money you have already deposited somewhere and are waiting to collect, which means the psychological impact of having that benefit reduced is not abstract disappointment. It registers as a loss of something that already belonged to you. That feeling is real, and it is also exactly the kind of emotional response that tends to produce reactive decisions rather than strategic ones. There is also something specific happening when the threat involves a government program. Research from Cornell behavioral economist Robert Frank found that people systematically underestimate policy risk when the policy in question has been stable for a long time. The longer something has gone unchanged, the more the brain treats its continuation as the default. Not as one of many possible futures, but as the only plausible one. Social Security has been structurally intact for 90 years. That stability is, paradoxically, part of what makes the risk invisible. The brain has too much evidence in favor of continuity and too little capacity to imagine the discontinuity, even as the data for it accumulates. Which means the people most psychologically unprepared for a Social Security restructuring are not the ones who never paid attention. They are the ones who paid close attention for decades, watched the program survive every political challenge, and drew the reasonable conclusion that it would keep surviving. That conclusion made sense. It was also, at some point, the last update they made to their assumptions. The window to make strategic decisions is open right now, not because the proposal has passed. It has not. But because the category of risk it represents is not going away, Social Security will be modified. The only variable is how and when and whether you have already positioned yourself around the rules that were true yesterday rather than the rules that will be true when you claim. To understand what is actually at stake here, you need to see the numbers side by side. Not as percentages, but as total dollars over a real retirement. Take two people. Same age, same earnings history, same full retirement age benefit of $3,822 per month. Person A retires at full retirement age in 2026, before any cap legislation takes effect, and claims her full benefit. Person B, in an alternate timeline, retires in 2028 after a version of the cap has been implemented, and her annual benefit is reduced from $45,864 to a capped amount. A reduction of even $400 per month, which is relatively modest in this scenario, compounds across a long retirement into numbers that are genuinely hard to absorb. Over 25 years, $400 per month is $120,000. Over 30 years, it is $144,000. And that is before you account for the fact that Social Security benefits receive cost of living adjustments. The lost base compounds upward with every COLA. A benefit that was reduced at the start produces a smaller COLA-adjusted check every subsequent year. The gap between the two trajectories does not stay flat. It widens. And it is not just the monthly check. Social Security survivor benefits, spousal benefits, and the interaction between Social Security income and Medicare premium calculations all flow from your primary benefit amount. Reducing the base benefit does not just reduce one line item. It affects a cascade of downstream calculations that most people never see until they are already inside the system and living with the results. The Social Security Administration's own data shows that women on average live about 2 years longer in retirement than men, and that for couples, at least one partner is statistically likely to live into their mid to late 80s. A joint benefit that is capped at $100,000 for a couple, when their combined earned benefit would have been $110,000 or $115,000, may sound like a relatively small reduction. But across a 30-year joint retirement, that gap is not small. It is not recoverable from other sources unless you built those sources deliberately and well in advance. This is the hidden cost that almost nobody talks about. The same person with the same work history, the same contributions, the same planning. Slightly different timing, completely different retirement income. Not because of anything they did wrong, because a rule changed between when they made their assumptions and when they walked through the door. And once you have claimed, you cannot undo it. If this is the first time you are really thinking about Social Security as something that could change before you get there, that is exactly why this channel exists. Like and subscribe if you want to keep understanding the systems that affect your money before they affect you. New video every week. The part most people miss entirely is what happens when a cap like this does not stay fixed at $50,000, because whether you are safely below it today may have very little to do with whether you are safely below it when you retire. There is a version of this proposal that is relatively targeted. A $50,000 cap that is indexed to inflation, adjusted annually alongside CPI, only ever affects the highest benefit recipients, and everyone else's plan stays intact. That version is a policy debate about progressivity in a retirement income program, and reasonable people can disagree about it. But that is not how these things tend to work in practice. The most important word in any benefit cap discussion is indexed. Whether the cap rises automatically with inflation determines whether it stays targeted or slowly expands to cover more people over time. Social Security's full retirement age was originally set at 65. A 1983 reform began raising it gradually to 67. That change, which felt modest at the time, affected the retirement planning of every worker born after 1954. Not through dramatic cuts, but through slow structural drift that accumulated into a meaningful difference by the time people hit the threshold. Tax brackets work the same way. Bracket creep, the phenomenon where inflation pushes income into higher tax brackets without any nominal increase in real purchasing power, is a documented pattern in tax policy. When thresholds are not indexed, what looks like a policy aimed at one group gradually expands its reach. An unindexed $50,000 benefit cap in 2026 is a meaningfully different number than it will be in 2036 after a decade of 3 to 4% average inflation. At 3% annual inflation, a $50,000 threshold in real terms drops to roughly $37,000 of today's purchasing power by 2036. More retirees fall under the cap. Not because their situation changed, but because the cap moved. This is not a hypothetical concern. Supplemental Security Income, the companion program to Social Security, is means-tested. Its benefit levels have eroded in real terms because means-tested programs are politically easier to cut. They serve a narrower constituency, and a narrower constituency produces weaker political resistance to reductions. The Earned Income Tax Credit, food assistance, housing vouchers, all programs built on need rather than contribution, have experienced benefit erosion over time through funding battles that Social Security's universal structure has largely avoided. Introducing a benefit cap at the high end does not eliminate Social Security's universal character overnight, but it creates a precedent and a mechanism for expanding the cap over time. And the history of similar programs suggests that once the door to means testing opens, it tends to open wider. There is also a broader philosophical issue that the proposal forces into the open, one that will not be resolved by this particular piece of legislation regardless of whether it passes. Social Security was designed as an earned benefit, not a welfare program. You paid into it proportionally to your income. Your benefit was calculated proportionally to your contributions. The insurance logic of the program, you contribute and you receive, and the two are linked, is the reason it has maintained political durability for 90 years. Means testing it, even partially, even at the high end, changes that logic. Once the program shifts from you receive based on what you earned to you receive based on what you need, it becomes politically vulnerable in ways it never was before. Every program that becomes needs-based eventually becomes a negotiation about whose needs qualify. That conversation has started. And regardless of where it lands, the people planning retirement around the assumption that Social Security is a fixed, predictable income source proportional to their contributions are working from a model that may already be outdated. The question that has been running through this entire video is this: when does a rule change stop being something you can plan around and become something you are simply subject to? The answer is not the date legislation passes. The answer is the moment you claim. The Social Security Administration does not retroactively adjust benefits once you have started receiving them based on a rules change that comes after your claim date. Your benefit amount is locked at the point of claim. That is both the protection and the trap. It means that if you claim before a cap takes effect, you are protected from the cap's direct impact on your benefit amount. It also means that if you make permanent decisions about claiming or about how much you are counting on Social Security relative to other income sources, before you fully understand what the rules will be, you have locked yourself into a strategy built around information that may no longer be accurate. There are things you can actually do with this information right now. First, run your numbers under two scenarios. Scenario 1 is your projected benefit unchanged. Scenario 2 is your projected benefit reduced by 15 to 25%, which brackets both the proposed cap impact and the projected across-the-board cut if no legislation passes at all. If your retirement income still works in Scenario 2, you are well positioned. If Scenario 2 leaves a gap, you have time to address it. But only if you start now, not in 2032. Second, understand the claiming age decision as a hedge. Claiming Social Security later, at 70 instead of 62, increases your monthly benefit by up to 77% compared to early claiming. If a cap is applied to annual dollar amounts, a higher base benefit is not necessarily better positioning. But if the cap is applied as a reduction from your calculated benefit, your strategy around when to claim may need to be reconsidered in light of which version of the proposal eventually passes. Third, treat tax-advantaged accounts differently than you may have been. Roth conversions in particular look more attractive in a world where Social Security becomes less predictable. Roth withdrawals in retirement are not counted as income for the purposes of Social Security benefit calculation adjustments. If means testing expands over time, which the trajectory of this conversation suggests is possible, having income that does not count as income in that calculation has compounding value that grows every year you hold it. None of this requires certainty about what happens legislatively. It requires acknowledging that the certainty you assumed you had about one pillar of your retirement income plan may have been more conditional than you thought, and that the window to respond to that is open right now, not after the cap takes effect. You are not behind because you failed to predict a Social Security restructuring. Nobody handed you a manual for how to plan around a rule that has not changed yet. You built your plan on the information you had. That is not a mistake. What matters now is that you have new information. And new information acted on before a decision becomes irreversible is the entire difference between adapting and being adapted to. The people who end up most affected by a rule change like this are not the ones who ignored every warning. They are the ones who knew something was coming, filed it under "we'll see," and then crossed a threshold they did not realize was permanent. That is not a failure of discipline or intelligence. That is the availability heuristic doing exactly what it is designed to do, prioritizing the vivid and immediate over the abstract and future. The system was not built to help you feel the urgency of a benefit cut that is still several years away. That is a feature of the policy environment, not a flaw in you. What you can do right now, today, is open your My Social Security account, run your benefit projections, and stress test them against a 20 to 25% reduction. Not because that reduction is certain, because knowing how your plan holds up under that scenario costs you nothing, and not knowing costs you the ability to respond.